You know him as a host of sports journalists from places like ESPN, CNN, and the LA Times. His new podcast, Life Out Loud, aims to preserve the history of the LGBTQ community. It's available now wherever you get your podcast. LZ, welcome to Takeline.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited, especially since I know we're going to spend half the podcast breaking down what's in your spot right now.
Oh my goodness, we are not going to do that. Just look at it as a whole. Listen, I wanted to talk to you about some things because in terms of sports and how it relates to the LGBTQ community, now we've seen a lot of legislation get passed banning transgender athletes from competing in competition within their gender identity. Now, clearly this is a manufactured problem because we haven't seen enough data to prove that this is needed. But how do you see sports landscape changing in reaction to these type of legislations?
That's a very good question because 10 years ago, I would have said that what happens in DC and what happens on the field and what happens on airwaves are still in silos. But one thing that is definitely true post the other guy's administration is that it's almost impossible now to pull apart these pieces. Yeah. That if you say, for instance, wore a Tom Brady jersey, you may be making a political affiliation statement now that you weren't making 10 years ago. So when I think about the LGBTQ people in general and these trans kids, these trans youth, specifically to your question, I don't know if professional sports or any level of sports can begin to have this conversation without also being cognizant of how this will play out politically in terms of, will so-and-so tweet about me? Will so-and-so say this on Fox News about me or CNN about me? So I think these things have always been married, Renee. It's just that they've come into a clearer focus because of social media and because of what the country went through over the past 5 years.
We're seeing these kind of tensions play out, not just here in this country, but internationally. Mm-hmm. Recently, German football stadiums defied UEFA, the European football organizing body, by lighting up their stadiums with pride colors. You've covered sports internationally for a while. How do you see other countries handling what seems to be the more conservative leanings of their international governing bodies?
Well, I would say that the world as a whole is responding to these issues in very much the way we are here stateside. Case in point, the strategy you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Forgive me, but I ain't following German soccer like that, so I didn't know what the hell was going on. But I do follow Nicholas Kiefer, who is a retired German tennis player. And he simply put up a rainbow flag on his Twitter feed one day. And I was like, no way, Nicholas Kiefer's gay? Oh, hell yeah, we in the cut like that. But it wasn't that. He was just showing support for the community because of what you're talking about right there. And that reminds me so much of the way that we have domestic athletes who will show support for a very, wide range of subject matters using their own social media platforms to let people know we're not all like this, we're not all thinking the same way. So I think there's one aspect of it where there are certain countries where being LGBTQ youth can lead to death, right? That is a different conversation to be had because we're still having sporting events held in those spaces. And we haven't even begun having those conversations. Why is the ATP holding tournaments in countries where LGBTQ people can be killed? Stuff like that. Mm-hmm. That's one aspect of the conversation. But then there's what you're talking about, which is how are our citizens navigating this and how are other athletes navigating this? And I think that one example I just showed, and I know there are other examples of athletes doing what they do here stateside. Something happens policy-wide, they got something to say and they're not afraid to say it and challenge.
No, that's true. People are not afraid to say anything anymore. Like that time has passed where people are quiet. And an athlete that stood up very loud in a post last week was Raiders defensive lineman Carl Nassib, who came out as the only player actively playing in the NFL that's gay. And he's having, I want to say this to make sure we acknowledge that he's a great football player. He's having an amazing career so far, 20 and a half sacks in 5 seasons. But what do you make of the rigors involved in the decision-making of athletes and coming out. As we've seen, sometimes it works well, and sometimes you have people like a Michael Sam who just couldn't find his footing in the NFL after he came out.
It's a case-by-case basis, and I'm not trying to duck the question, but I think every sport has a different culture, and every athlete has a different journey. And so I don't know what Carl's journey was, right? I can make certain assumptions for sure based upon my own experiences in my years of reporting, but we don't know what it was like for him because he hasn't shared that yet, that degree. So I don't know how to speak specifically to him. But what I will say is, having interviewed other NFL players who have come out in retirement, I can only assume the environment that Carl is coming out into hasn't changed that much from where Dave Kopay was, or Sarah Tualo was, or Michael Sam in your case. There are definitely policies domestically that have made things better for us legally. There's a shift in attitudes in people's hearts that have made things better for us culturally. But you know this, Renee, sports is a different beast, man.
Oh, yeah.
It's a work environment, but it's not a work environment, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of things that are more acceptable in a sports professional environment than it would be in any other environment, whether you're on the field or reporter or a commentator or anything. You're attached to sports. It's just a different set of rules. So I don't know how Carl processed everything. But it certainly helps that he has that contract.
Yeah,
definitely.
That's the thing that's different. That's the thing that's different this time. Michael Sam, he was drafted. He was a late pick. He had a okay preseason, and then he didn't make the team. And we could certainly, think about all the different reasons why he didn't make the team. We could say homophobia played a part. We could say his size played a part. We could say the reality TV show that he was planning on doing played a part. But we can't definitively say it was homophobia that kept Michael Sam out of the sport. But in Carl's case, to your point, Renee, he's an excellent football player. He's got a nice fat-ass contract, and he's got the numbers. So what you gonna say? All of a sudden now he can't play because he's gay? Come on now.
Make it make sense. They'll have to make it make sense.
They'll have to make it make sense.
You said something about like the environment that it was for the retired players. What was that environment? Because you talked about it, but what was that environment that you don't think has changed that much?
The presence of toxic masculinity is still there.
Yeah.
The need to project this sort of tougher than tough presence at all times for survival in the NFL is still there. And the reason why I say that is because we are still trying to have an intelligent conversation about mental health. And the biggest, stigma about mental health as it pertains to men is that if you admit this, that means you're weak somehow. And that's mental health, right? Which is, at this point, you would think basic as hell, and no one would still be trying to push back over this notion that, we need to take care of our minds the same way we do our bodies.
Right.
But we haven't even evolved there yet. So this idea that an entire league, which is still grappling with mental health, which quite hasn't figured out yet how to handle domestic violence and sexual assault allegations, which is still an even process in the fact they got black players who actually have lives outside of the football stadium and may actually be concerned that if not them, then someone they love may be, confronted with a hostile situation as it pertains to law enforcement. How in the hell are they going to process different sexual orientations? Heaven forbid somebody comes out as pansexual. The NFL might just blow up. Yeah.
Oh.
Pansexual? What the hell? Oh, what is that? Roger, you ready for a statement? No. Ignore it. Pretend like it didn't happen.
Oh my God.
Pansexual? What?
Oh my gosh.
They ain't ready.
So obviously, we don't want to speculate on what it was that led Carl to feel like now is the right time. And you mentioned the presence of toxic masculinity within locker rooms. I think what I'm getting at is some of my friends who are not like super sports people, right? Sports fans.
I don't know those people.
Right. To them, they'd say, "Oh, well, why don't?" like, you know, I would have discussions about with them about, oh yeah, there are surely gay players in the NFL and MLB and in NBA.
Yep.
Well, why don't they just come out? Like, it's a totally different world. You know, like, what's the big deal? Like, why don't they just do it? And toxic masculinity aside, what would you say to them as some of the other pressures that are just that are inherent in sports that aren't the same in, you know, your kind of like general office culture?
Well, I think one, the people who are closeted that I know are closeted for a variety of reasons. It's not just simply the culture has changed. I know men who won't come out because they come from a very conservative family background and they don't want to manage that conversation come Thanksgiving or Christmas.
Mm.
I know men who don't want to come out because they are concerned about their next contract. Now, of course, these men have been concerned about their next contract for 10 years, so I'm giving them the side eye. But nonetheless, that's what they're saying. That's what they're saying is that they're concerned about their well-being. The idea that it's not a big deal, that we're there as a culture, doesn't mean that every pocket is there. Mm. You know, we're in the midst of Pride Month, and that doesn't mean that every community has flags waving. That doesn't mean that every Target has a pride display. And I can say this because I've been to Targets in sort of like more conservative parts of the country that were just like going, nah.
Yeah.
And then I've been to LA and it's just like, pew. So just as there's different approaches to the displays that a Target may have during this time of month, that's also true for people's realities. And so I try not to judge these men, and I'm going to say men because let's be real about it. That's what we're talking about, right? Like, we understand that the country certainly has a much more accepting attitude about women coming out in sports than they do about men. The numbers would suggest that anyway. But these men aren't coming out for a variety of reasons, but it all boils down to one core essential part of all of it, and that's fear. There is shame and there's fear. And so when people say, why don't you just come out? Well, why don't you look at the 250 plus anti-LGBTQ bills that have been introduced in this year alone and ask me if that feels good to you? Or why don't you go back and just listen to the confirmation hearing for Dr. Rachel Levine and the line of questioning that was being asked about her. We had a U.S. senator in the midst of a pandemic question her about a child's genitalia and mutilation, but not once about the pandemic that we were trying to recover from. So if you're asking me, you know, what's the big deal? I would simply say to you, you tell me, because we just trying to live our lives. Y'all the motherfuckers that won't let us just live.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry, can I curse in this? I'm sorry.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. Yes.
You can just beat me out or something. He needs something. He's got a New York Knicks artwork behind him. He needs some kind of joy.
This is exactly why your new podcast that's out, Life Out Loud, is available now. People can hear your personality. You're hilarious. Yes. Tell us what's in store on future episodes and why this project is so important to you, because clearly you're a handful and it's fun to hear.
Thank you. Future episodes. I'm actually really excited about the second half of season 1, which is crazy because the first half of season 1 was bonkers, right? Dr. Fauci, MJ Rodriguez, Dr. Levine, like really, really important figures, Senator Tammy Baldwin. But the second half is when I get real gully, I think. And it's because I have like
How
an episode.
How did you get gully on him? How did you get gully?
You get gully on Dr. Fauci?
So I didn't feel that was appropriate.
Okay.
But
so you set it up.
So in the second half of the season, like for instance, there's a sports conversation that we actually recorded prior to Carl coming out. Listen, we calling him Carl like we boys. Prior to him coming out, I never even heard of the dude before last week. But still, you in the family now, so we good. It was myself, it was Keyshawn Johnson, it was Jason Collins, and it was Rick Welts, the outgoing president of the Golden State Warriors. 2 openly gay men in professional sports, and then obviously Keyshawn is an ally. And we just have a real conversation about that intersection of sexual orientation and sports. I also spent some time talking to this actor by the name of Daniel Newman, for those of you who are Walking Dead fans. Daniel came out a few years ago, and we have a whole conversation about his thirst trap videos on Instagram. And then he actually wrote up on my page and actually posted something like I was thirst trapping. And then he, at the same day, he posts something up with him standing there in the jockstrap. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Your whole ass is hanging out.
What is going on?
Your whole ass is hanging out. And you on my page talking about some thirst trapping. So
What?
these are conversations, legitimate conversations that we have, on future episodes of the podcast. But they're meant to be fun, right? And they're meant to talk about things like the male figure and the body and why we actually squeamish about it. And when we talk about, men in sports and like, what is it about the idea there's a gay man in the locker room that makes you so nervous and upset you can't manage it, and that your response is to make sure he can't be there, as opposed to you just doing some simple work and figuring out why your homophobia has got you so caught up like that. So we have those conversations, and then we get back to some seriousness, because I do go back to interview some politicians. But there are some real fun conversations in the second half where we have, I won't say inappropriate conversations, because I think all conversations are inappropriate.
It sounded like it got a little spicy.
Well, I mean, it was pride, girl. We were proud.
Okay, look, listen, don't threaten me with a good time. That's all I'm saying, okay?
It was really, really a lot of joy. And then the very last episode of season 1, right before the Olympics, we talked to gay Olympian Tom Daley and his husband, who's Oscar winner, Dustin Lance Black. And we have an amazing conversation about their marriage, how they met, their value system. They're raising a child, so parenting as, these two gay dads with these big careers. And we have a lot of laughter and fun with that. So I as much as I love the first half of season 1, season 2, I think is equally, if not as joyous.
Well, he is LZ Granderson. Listen to his podcast, Life Out Loud, on all major podcast platforms. New episodes dropping every Thursday. LZ, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you guys
LZ.
so much. And I'm taking a screen grab, Renee, because
Yeah.
I'm going to break down your background.
Oh my gosh. Oh, well, speaking of, look at the wifey down there right there. So when you see that, make sure you get her, okay?
Oh, let me blow that out. Let me make sure I blow all that out.
Yeah.
Blow that out. I do feel you got to help Jason, though. He's got way too much New York Knicks stuff behind him.
I
They make
know.
one little postseason in 20 years, and he's like, he done threw a whole parade in his whole apartment.
I don't listen. It's like family. Just because someone's going through a tough time for 20 years, you don't
You
walk
love
away
them
from
anyway. You love them anyway.
Y'all ain't won a championship since I was in diapers. You go on with that.
Oh my God.
Them. You don't have to tell me.